Hi, my name is Larry Krieger. I've taught American history to students in suburban, urban, and rural districts in North Carolina and New Jersey. But you probably recognize me as the author of widely used APUS history prep books. I'm very proud of the fact that the overwhelming majority of my students have scored 4s and 5s on their APUSH exams. Now, my mission in creating this video is simple. I'm here to help you enjoy AP American History, and I'm here to help you earn 4s and 5s on your exam. So, let's get started. Today's video is devoted to the important topic of sugar and slavery. Now, I'd like to begin the video by directing your attention to this picture of a very tasty cupcake. Would you enjoy eating this cupcake? I know I would. Well, of course we would. It contains sugar, and humans seem to have a built-in liking for foods that taste sweet. In fact, believe it or not, American consumers eat about 150 pounds of sugar each year. That's incredible. Now, you may ask, well, that's interesting, but what does the consumption of cupcakes and sugar have to do with our topic, sugar and slavery? Well, let me answer this question with two more questions. First, which colonial product, sugar or tobacco, do you think was the most valuable? Well, most students would probably say tobacco, but most students would be wrong. See those sugar canes in the picture on the right? Well, they're tall plants, 12 to 14 feet high, couple inches across. Believe it or not, New World exports of sugar in 1700 were 4 times more valuable than the exports of tobacco. Now let's turn to our second question. Which colonial product, sugar or tobacco, do you believe played the most significant role in the rise of the Atlantic slave trade? Once again, most students would probably say tobacco, but once again, these students would be wrong. About 70% of all enslaved Africans in the New World actually worked on sugar plantations. Well, as you can see, our topic, sugar, slavery, and APUSH, is going to lead us to unexpected discoveries. In addition, we will take a look at topics that have connections to key subjects in periods 1 and 2 of the American History Course and Exam Description booklet. So let's get started. Now, let's begin with the topic of where sugar actually came from. Sugar cane can be traced, surprisingly, to the island of New Guinea, which, as you can see in our map, is due north of Australia. A few thousand years ago, the inhabitants of New Guinea discovered that this tall grass contained a liquid that tasted good. Over the centuries, knowledge of how to grow, mill, and refine sugarcane gradually spread west to India, Persia, and the Middle East. Well, let's proceed to the Middle East, the Islamic world. Arab chefs mastered the art of growing, refining, and cooking with sugar. They combined sugar with crushed almonds to create marzipan. Look at this picture. A delicious sweet still very popular today. Now, at that time, sugar and sugarcane were unknown in Western Europe. But that changed with the Crusades. The Crusaders conquered Jerusalem in 1099, and they quickly developed a taste for the city's very sweet and delicious pastries. When the soldiers returned to Europe, they brought small quantities of sugar with them. Sugar soon became a coveted but rare and expensive status symbol for European royalty. Let's switch our attention now to the Canary Islands. As you can see from this map, the Canary Islands are an archipelago of about 7 islands. They're about 62 miles due west of the African coast and 1,056 miles south of Spain. Now, the Spanish conquered and colonized the Canary Islands, and within a short time began to build sugar plantations. The Spanish recalled the experience they had had with enslaved Africans, and so they, in a fateful development, used enslaved Africans to cultivate what soon became a very lucrative crop. And now our attention switches to someone I think you'll recognize. Staring out at us from the picture is none other than Christopher Columbus. Well, we all know that Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. And most students think that's it. After this epic first voyage, he disappeared from the pages of history. That's not true. Columbus's successful first voyage excited the ambition of the Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella, and they financed a huge second expedition that included 14 ships. Columbus began his second expedition by stopping at the Canary Islands to take on much-needed provisions. He was there for a month, and while he was there, he had an affair with Beatrice de Bobadilla. She was the beautiful and widowed governor of one of the islands, La Gomera. Beatrice had an insight. She thought that the sugar cane, which grew so well on the Canary Islands, would probably grow well in the islands of the Caribbean that Columbus was headed for. So she gave Columbus a bundle of sugarcane cuttings as a souvenir to take with him. Well, those 17 ships had cargoes that were loaded with foods and animals. You can see on this map that the Spanish brought with them, well, look at this, grapes, they hope to make wine, onions, bananas, olives, and oh yes, don't forget those sugarcane cuttings. Well, when the voyagers returned, they brought back with them corn, beans, potatoes, peanuts. Now, historians now call this exchange of foods, animals, people, and diseases the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange is a very important concept that has generated a significant cluster of answers on APUSH multiple choice questions. Let's focus now on the island of Hispaniola. You can see it on your map. It's east of Cuba, and it's the second largest island in the Caribbean. The Spanish hoped that they could grow grapes, but that didn't work at all. When grapes failed, they turned to those sugarcane cuttings that Columbus brought with him, and much to their surprise and pleasure, the sugarcane thrived on the island of Hispaniola. Within a short time, the Spanish had sugar plantations, and by 1516, they began to export profitable cargoes of sugar to Europe. Now, those plantations had to be organized, and since sugar is a labor-intensive crop, the Spanish needed workers to help harvest and refine the sugar. And so they developed a system that is known as the Encomienda system. It began on the sugar plantations in Hispaniola and later spread to Mexico. Now, the official definition of an encomienda was a license granted by the Spanish crown to royal officials to organize and exploit, the Spanish would have said regulate, the labor of native peoples living in specific areas. In return, the Spanish were supposed to Christianize the native peoples. Now, you take a look at this engraving from 1623, and it purports to give you an idea of the complex series of steps that were required to cut and refine sugar. Here in the upper right, we can see Native American laborers. They've cut the sugar cane, put it in bundles, and now they bring it over to this mill where a turning wheel that you can see right here would crush the stalks into a syrupy liquid. The liquid would then be poured into vats to be boiled, and then it would finally be poured into jars to be cooled. Ultimately, the brown sugar crystals would be stored in 1,000-pound barrels and then loaded onto ships. Now, I have to say, this engraving does not actually do justice to the sheer horror of working on a sugar plantation. It doesn't show us that temperatures in the boiling house reached 120 degrees. It also doesn't show us Native Americans who lost their arms, stuck or caught in that turning, grinding wheel. And it certainly doesn't show us the cruel Spanish overseers who beat and sometimes tortured their Native American workers. The inhumanity of the encomienda system appalled the Dominican friar Bartolome de las Casas. Las Casas renounced his encomienda and denounced the Spanish as ravening wolves and savage lions who descended upon defenseless Native Americans. Now, I'd like to tell you that Las Casas' campaign worked and that the measures he proposed came into action and helped improve the condition of the Native American laborers. But, in fact, while he was attempting to promote reforms, the Native Americans were succumbing to old world diseases such as smallpox, measles, and cholera. Our recent experience with COVID-19 has taught us how disruptive and frightening a pandemic can be. But at least we have face masks, vaccines, modern science, so we understand what's happening. Imagine what it would have been like to be a Native American struck by these deadly diseases. The old world diseases decimated the Native American population. For example, in just 40 years, the Tano population on Hispaniola plummeted from about 300,000 to near extinction. Well, we've seen sugar plantations required a large labor supply. The death of the Tano laborers forced the Spanish on Hispaniola to make a fateful decision. Determined to find a large labor force, they began to replace indigenous workers with enslaved Africans. Now, at the same time this process was taking place, Sugar was becoming one of the world's most coveted and valuable commodities. Demand rose, especially in England, as people used sugar to sweeten their coffee and tea. Well, ambitious British entrepreneurs cast covetous eyes on the small island of Barbados. You can see it's located in the southeastern corner of the Caribbean. In fact, Barbados is the easternmost island of the Caribbean. Now, don't be fooled by the island's small size. It was just 21 miles long and 14 miles wide. During the 17th century, Barbadian sugar plantations generated more trade than the combined total of all the other British colonies. By 1650, more English had settled in Barbados than in New England or Virginia combined. That's incredible. I told you we'd have some unexpected discoveries. Well, the sugar planters on Barbados, of course, needed a large body of captive workers, and so they began to import enslaved Africans. The number of enslaved Africans working on Barbadian sugar plantations soared from 800 in 1644 to over 50,000 by 1700. Now, British efforts were not limited to just Barbados. British entrepreneurs cast covetous eyes to the island of Jamaica. As you can see, it's located south of Cuba and west of Hispaniola. It's actually the third largest island in the Caribbean, and it's 25 times larger than the island of Barbados. During the 1700s, Jamaica replaced Barbados as the crown jewel in the British Empire. A familiar and brutal pattern repeated itself as Jamaican sugar planters imported large numbers of enslaved Africans. By 1750, a labor force of 150,000 enslaved Africans labored on over 700 large sugar plantations on the island of Jamaica. Now, this movement of enslaved Africans to Barbados and Jamaica was part of a larger process that we call the Atlantic slave trade. Historians estimate that between 10 and 12 million Africans were forcibly taken from their homes and shipped as human cargo to plantations in the New World. We've already seen the surprising and unexpected fact that approximately 70% of all enslaved Africans worked on sugar plantations. Now, I'd like to show you two more surprising facts. Look at this thin line showing you the movement of enslaved Africans to North America. According to the chart of the 10 million or so Africans who were shipped to North America, just 427,000 came to those British colonies. That's like 4 or 5%. That's surprising. So where did the majority or a large number of the enslaved Africans go? Well, look at the West Indies. The movement to Jamaica and Barbados, which was very large, about 1 million enslaved Africans, was part of a larger total of over 4 million enslaved Africans who were shipped to the West Indies. Now, this movement of enslaved Africans and sugar was part of a larger process called the transatlantic trade. Textbooks are fond of describing the transatlantic trade as a series of triangular movements. Well, that may be true, but I'd like to focus your attention on an often overlooked movement of goods. Look at this green arrow right here. It's showing you a movement of flour, fish, and meat from the British colonies, principally the New England and Middle colonies, to the Caribbean, and in return, a return shipment of money, molasses, sugar, and some enslaved people back to the British colonies. Now, what's going on here? I don't understand this. Why are the British colonies, Jamaica and Barbados, importing food and fish, flour and meat? The answer has to do with the economics of growing sugar. Those sugar plantations on Barbados and Jamaica were immensely profitable. It was possible for the planters to grow 2 tons of sugar per acre. Given these economics, the planters decided it was pointless to waste valuable land growing crops, wheat. It was also pointless to waste valuable time fishing. The more economical thing to do was to import these goods from the British colonies. Now, this back and forth movement that you see right here between the British colonies and the Caribbean islands will turn out to be a very important process as tensions begin to develop between the British colonies and the mother country in England. Well, I'm pleased to say we've taken a close look at the connections between sugar and slavery. I'd like now to do a quick, fast review of the key points that we made in this presentation. First, don't forget the Columbian Exchange. It refers to the exchange of plants, animals, peoples, and diseases between the old and new worlds. And don't forget the term Encomienda was a system devised by the Spanish to organize and exploit the labor of Native Americans. These two terms, Columbian Exchange and the Encomienda system, have generated a significant number of questions on multiple choice items on the APUSH exam. And remember, the Columbian Exchange also included contagious diseases. These diseases, like smallpox, decimated the population of Native Americans. As a result, the Spanish began to import enslaved Africans to their New World sugar plantations. Now, those sugar plantations on Barbados and Jamaica generated enormous profits for the British Empire. The Atlantic slave trade was brutal, but a vital part of world commerce. Sugar and slavery fueled the growth of an extensive transatlantic trading network. The Atlantic slave trade and the transatlantic trading network have generated short answer questions and long answer questions on APUSH exams. Well, I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I hope that I've achieved my 2 goals: to help you enjoy AP American History, and of course, to earn 4s and 5s on your APUSH exam. Now, I hope that you'll take a look at or check out my website, insidertestprep.com, for additional resources that include prep books, multiple choice and short answer practice questions. Thank you again for joining me. I'll see you soon on our next video.